Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Mer Meitzelfeld, Peer's Institutional Giving Manager, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Public Employees, Free Speech, and the Rise of Authoritarianism, Why It Matters for the Environment. This webinar is co-presented by Peer and several guest speakers. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared with participants after the live event. Today, we will discuss three cases in which government agencies have sought to impede the free speech rights of public employees to express opinions in their official or personal capacities and petition the government on matters of public concern. Each case will be introduced by the lead attorney and then described by the client. The speakers will give context on each case and describe how the retaliation tactics they experience can be weaponized in a time of rising authoritarianism. Before we look at today's agenda, we'd like to learn a little bit more about who's attending the webinar. Please take a moment to respond to our introduction poll question. How would you describe yourself? And we'll give everyone just a few seconds to respond. All right, looks like most everyone has had a chance to answer. So could we show the results, please? All right, so we have 5 folks joining today that are current government employees, 14 that are former government employees, 3 media employees, 11 students or educators, 10 from the nonprofit sector, 3 employees from the private sector, 12 concerned citizens, 13 retired, and 3 other. Thanks all for being here. We can close the poll. Next slide, please. Our agenda for today will start off with Tim Whitehouse, Peer's Executive Director, who will give an overview of why these issues matter now. Next, Joanna Citron-Day, Peer's General Counsel, and Sarah Sullivan, former Tribal Section Manager at the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, will discuss how Sarah was fired after signing a letter of dissent at EPA and how and why she is appealing her termination. Then Colleen Zimmerman, Peer Staff Counsel, and Carolyn McConnell, attorney at the National Labor Relations Board, will share how Carolyn was threatened with criminal prosecution and discipline for her activism as a private citizen on behalf of a national park, and they will describe Carolyn's lawsuit defending her free speech rights. Lena Shapiro, director of the First Amendment Law Clinic and the University of Illinois College of Law, and Dr. Derek Pennington, former economic policy analyst at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, will then discuss corporate influence over Derek's termination after he expressed opinions on matters of public concern in social media posts and their lawsuit challenging Derek's dismissal. Finally, Paula Dinnerstein, senior counsel at Peer, will provide summary thoughts on these legal issues and why free speech for government employees is so important in this time of upheaval, and also why it matters for the environment. We will have an open Q&A after the presentations. Please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen to submit your questions throughout the webinar. Click the thumbs up to upvote questions you're interested in. We will not be monitoring questions through the chat, but rather through the Q&A. And with that, let's please take the slides down. The other speakers can turn their cameras off, and we'll turn it over to Tim to kick us off.
Thank you, Mer, and welcome everyone. Thank you for coming. I especially want to thank Sarah, Carolyn, and Derek for coming here today to tell their stories and sharing why their stories matter, not only for free speech rights of government employees, but also for the integrity of government agencies and our environment and the natural world around us. Looking around our country right now, we have many serious problems tearing at the fabric of our nation. The Trump administration is engaged in dangerous, un-American tactics to suppress speech they dislike and cementing their control over institutions by rooting out employees they perceive as disloyal. We are now seeing the shocking use of force and intimidation to crush dissent. The cases that you will hear today are not headline free speech cases. They are not about brute force, and they originated in both Republican and Democratic administrations. Rather, they raise critical legal and policy issues that we need to fight for every day. Their outcomes will help determine what kind of nation we become. Again, thank you for joining us today. Mur, back to you.
Thanks so much, Tim, for that introduction. And now we will move to Joanna Citron-Day, Peers General Counsel, and Sarah Sullivan, former Tribal Section Manager at EPA. Welcome.
Thanks, Mur, and thank you, Tim, for that great introduction. My name is Joanna Citron-Day. I'm General Counsel here at PEER, and I'm going to talk for just a few minutes about one of PEER's current employee defense cases involving Sarah Sullivan, a former Tribal Section Manager. PEER is representing Sarah to appeal her firing before the Merit Systems Protection Board, shortly known as MSPB for short. This case involves the rights of public employees to express dissent and report wrongdoing in their agencies. EPA employees signing a public letter that warns about this administration's threats to public health and the environment is protected by the First Amendment. It is not only illegal to fire public employees for sounding the alarm about this important issue, but also vital to our democracy. Now let's turn to Sarah's case and why her MSPB appeal is a key part of fighting for free speech rights of public employees and pushing back against the authoritarian power grab. Sarah was recently fired from EPA after over 11 years of distinguished federal service, after signing a public letter in her personal capacity to Administrator Zeldin in Congress that criticized the administration's abandonment of EPA's public health mission in a variety of ways, including rolling back critical regulations, gutting EPA's science office, partisan messaging, and promoting a culture of fear and intolerance. EPA alleges that Sarah's removal was based on a single vague charge of conduct unbecoming a federal employee for signing this open letter, and claimed that her firing is justified under applicable law. It's not justified. Sarah's firing is illegal. The bases for her appeal are removal without good cause, meaning that EPA failed to provide any evidence of how signing the letter in any way limited or prevented Sarah from performing her job duties. Violation of her First Amendment rights, which is something that the Supreme Court has long held for public employees having a right to speak on matters of public concern in their private capacity, as long as it does not prevent the employee from performing their job duties or interfering with agency operations. This letter was about EPA failing to carry out its stated mission, to protect public health and the environment. This is clearly a matter of public importance. Again, EPA failed to show how this interfered with Sarah's job or the regular operations of the agency. And finally, Sarah's appeal is based on the fact that this is a prohibited personnel practice. It's illegal under the Whistleblower Protection Act to fire an employee as retaliation for perceived political affiliation and/or disclosure of waste, fraud, or abuse. We're also raising the issue in Sarah's appeal about the firing being arbitrarily harsh. No one should have been punished for signing this letter, let alone fired. The punishments range from nothing to a 14-day suspension to firing, among other things, with no rhyme or reason for how the punishments were doled out among various employees. As a side note, MSPB is an independent agency that hears and decides employee appeals of significant personnel actions like removals and protects federal employees against unfair practices. Its independence is under attack by the Trump administration, which will have terrible implications for public employees. We'll provide some helpful links in the closing slide, and I'm happy to discuss this more during the Q&A after the presentations. And now I'd like to turn it over to Sarah to talk more about her background and why she thought it was important to exercise her free speech rights by signing this dissent letter. Sarah?
Thank you, Joanna. And thank you all for the opportunity to share a little bit about my experience. As Joanna mentioned, until October of last year, I was one of the tribal section managers at US EPA Region 9 in San Francisco. I was managing a team that worked with and administered grants for federally recognized tribes in California, Nevada, and Arizona. My 9-year career at EPA largely focused on public health communication and community collaboration, as well as internal coordination and process improvement. I started with EPA in October 2016, just before the 2016 election, and subsequently the start of the first Trump administration. There were significant challenges and concerns during the first Trump administration, but they paled in comparison to what I experienced in the first few months of the second Trump administration. The atmosphere at work was instantly traumatic after Trump took office in January of 2025. Within days, we were seeing regulations rolled back, grants to communities we had worked so hard to support canceled, and policies and union agreements supporting agency staff reduced or eliminated. The rhetoric we saw in press releases and public newsletters was astounding. It was inflammatory, it was insulting to agency employees, and shockingly partisan. It felt like the goal of every action of this administration was to undo all the agency's work to protect human health and the environment and make the atmosphere so traumatic that no one would want to work at EPA. We were seeing new layers of approval added without clear instructions and processes that changed every few days, though the administration claimed that they were working to improve efficiency. We were being given conflicting and often confusing directives that our career leadership was not permitted to put in writing, leading to more stress and more confusion. We were being told we weren't allowed to communicate with grantees and partners, undermining trust and relationships built over decades. In early February, 3/4 of my team was placed on administrative leave because the administration deemed their work to be environmental justice, completely disrupting the important community work they were doing. My team's work with tribes is not considered environmental justice work, and this felt retaliatory for being part of a larger division with environmental justice in the name. It was another exhibit of the Trump administration's attack on employees and valuable community work. We fought alongside our tribal partners to get the team reinstated, and were ultimately successful after 3 weeks. However, in April, notices of intent to conduct a reduction in force, or RIF, were issued for 3/4 of the team. Thankfully, those have not yet been implemented, allowing the team to continue to do important work supporting tribal nations. On June 30th, I saw several news articles regarding the EPA public declaration of dissent hosted by Stand Up for Science. I read the letter and felt strongly that I needed to add my support and signature. The letter reflected my experience and clearly, professionally articulated concerns. As Joanna mentioned, the letter outlined 5 primary concerns, backed up with links to publicly available articles, and called for EPA Administrator Zeldin to correct course and fulfill the agency's mission to protect human health and the environment. Though I'm sure there had been many different public petitions expressing concern about the administration's actions, it was important to me to sign onto this letter because it was from EPA current and former employees and supporters, signing in our personal capacity as private citizens, but those with first-hand experience and expertise on how the administration's actions were impacting the agency's mission and the possible long-term harms to human health and the environment. Signing felt like a small gesture when I had been struggling to find the right way to voice my concerns and advocate for myself, my team, and my agency's mission. I also knew that even though it felt small to add my signature to a public letter in my personal capacity, there could still be consequences under this administration. It felt important to me to include my name, despite this possibility, to use my freedom of speech, and take a stand for what I felt was so important to public health, not just in the US, but around the world. Just a few days later, on July 3rd, I, along with over 140 others, were notified by EPA that we were being placed on administrative leave for signing the letter, initially for 10 days. After 3 months of extensions and alleged investigations into our actions, less than 10 of us were terminated. Others received a range of punishments, such as letters of reprimand or 2 weeks unpaid suspension. While I knew there could be consequences, I did not think that they would lead to termination. It felt like such an outsized response to signing a public letter. Those of us removed represent decades of experience, expertise, and trust built with communities and partners, all taken away in an instant. The relationships and trust we built cannot be easily replaced, and even for work that is still getting done, those who have had to take up the work are overburdened and undersupported because of our absence. We were terminated unfairly for exercising free speech by signing a letter of dissent in our personal capacities. This sets a very dangerous precedent. Americans should be able to exercise their rights without retaliation. The retaliation against a few of us is meant to keep others quiet, but it's essential that we continue to exercise our rights and speak up when we feel we're able. With peers' assistance, myself and 5 others are currently challenging our terminations in order to help ensure that others are not persecuted for speaking out to protect the public. Thank you all so much for the time to speak with you today and to share my story.
Thank you so much, Joanna and Sarah, for speaking about your experience with us and your appeal to the MSPB. Now we will move on to Colleen Zimmerman, Peer Staff Counsel, and Carolyn McConnell, Attorney at the National Labor Relations Board. Welcome.
Thank you, Mer. Hello, everyone. My name is Colleen Zimmerman, and I'm one of the attorneys working on Carolyn McConnell's case. Carolyn McConnell, a field attorney for the National Labor Relations Board, or NLRB for short, was threatened with criminal prosecution and received a letter of counseling for her work and advocacy with the Northern Cascades Conservation Council. Specifically, for an op-ed she published with the Seattle Times and a related petition advocating against cuts in park staff at the North Cascades National Park. This was despite the fact that all of her advocacy work was done on her own time, unrelated to her NLRB work, and without mentioning her government position. In March 2025, Peer filed a lawsuit against the NLRB, alleging that 1, the agency misinterpreted a criminal conflict of interest statute, 18 U.S.C. Section 205, to apply to McConnell's activities. 2, that the interpretation of the statute violates McConnell's First Amendment rights of free speech and association and her right to petition the government. And 3, the NLRB's threats of future discipline and/or criminal prosecution for similar future activities violated her First Amendment rights and constitute a prior restraint on future speech. The judge in the Western District of Washington recently denied the NLRB's motion to dismiss the case, explaining that the NLRB likely did misinterpret the statute and violated McConnell's First Amendment rights, which bodes very well for the future success of the case. We will post links to the case filings and the statute in the webinar's closing slides. This case is important because if the federal government prevails in its interpretation of the criminal conflict of interest statute and its application to the First Amendment free speech rights of government employees, it will set a dangerous precedent and allow the government to expand its reach into the private civic affairs of its employees. Further, the statute could be weaponized to go after federal employees whose outside activities make them appear to be critics of the Trump administration. While McConnell was targeted under the Biden administration, this lawsuit takes on added significance given the Trump administration's attacks on federal employees and its blatant attempts to intimidate federal workers from engaging in civil affairs on their own time that run counter to the political wishes of the administration. Now, I'd like to turn things over to Carolyn to talk more about her experience, the case, and its implications. Carolyn?
Thank you, Colleen. I should say that my introduction as an NLRB employee is for identification purposes only. As should be obvious, I am not speaking for my agency here today. First, I want to pause to remember my fellow federal worker, Alex Jeffrey Preddy, an ICU nurse serving veterans who was killed by Border Patrol agents last Saturday while exercising his First Amendment right to protest. I have worked for the NLRB for 13 years as a lawyer protecting worker rights. I am also the granddaughter of leaders in the movement to create the North Cascades National Park. My grandparents helped create an organization, the North Cascades Conservation Council, N3C for short, which successfully spearheaded the struggle for the park and continues to advocate for the protection of the area. I have served on the N3C's board since long before I began working for the NLRB. As a public servant, I take my ethical obligations very seriously, and I am careful to avoid conflicts of interest. After moving from a writing career to a legal career, I kept up doing some occasional writing, but I am extremely careful not to write about anything remotely related to the NLRB. Like many federal government agencies, the NLRB has regulations requiring its employees to seek permission before publishing anything, and I have always followed those rules. When I wrote an op-ed for the N3C demanding that the North Cascades National Park keep open a visitor center and staff it with rangers, I dutifully, as usual, asked for permission, which I had always before gotten. This time, however, my agency's ethics office neither gave me permission nor denied it, telling me I could go ahead at my own risk. Since publishing an op-ed calling for a visitor center to be staffed did not seem like a particularly risky endeavor in America at that point, I went ahead. Little did I know that my agency was, behind the scenes, creating risk for me. The agency made a criminal referral to the U.S. Attorney's Office. The U.S. Attorney declined to prosecute, and I would have liked to have been a fly on the wall when this referral came in. I imagine the expressions on these career prosecutors' faces as they interrupted their work trying to send drug dealers, kidnappers, scammers, and murderers to prison to consider my supposedly criminal op-ed about park staffing. This would be very funny if it weren't so serious. The NLRB didn't take no for an answer. Turned down by prosecutors, the NLRB's Inspector General launched an investigation of me. That investigation ended with issuance of a letter of counseling saying that I had been breaking the law, and my agency directed me not to speak on behalf of the N3C to the Park Service or Forest Service or to advocate in any way as part of any group to any federal agency. The National Labor Relations Board is dedicated to protecting democracy in the workplace, including the right to join with coworkers to improve working conditions. So it is deeply ironic that they have sought to silence me and prevent me from joining with others to speak up for the North Cascades. My case arose during the Biden administration, but if this interpretation of the law is allowed to stand, it gives an authoritarian regime a weapon for stifling all federal workers. That is why my case matters for all of us. People become public servants because they want to serve. So they are likely to be people who will speak up for the public good in their private lives as well. They also are well informed about what government is up to, so they are sources of crucial information that the public deserves to know. The current administration knows this, and this is why it has systematically sought to silence and intimidate federal workers. The dizzying speed of change these days makes it difficult to calculate risk. Yet in this time of change, our own behavior can shape what comes next. It is critically important to speak up now as a fascist regime tries to school us to silence and compliance. When we speak up, we encourage others to speak up. Fear is contagious, but so is courage. When I was hired by the federal government, I, like all federal employees, swore an oath to defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. I'm sticking by that oath. Thank you.
Thank you, Colleen and Carolyn, for sharing this important case with us today. It's encouraging to hear about the recent decision denying the motion to dismiss this case. Now we'll move on to Lena Shapiro, Director of the First Amendment Law Clinic at the University of Illinois College of Law, and Dr. Derek Pennington, former Economic Policy Analyst at the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Welcome.
Thank you. Derek's case is not about rude speech, bad judgment, or agency efficiency. It's about whether a regulated corporation can effectively veto a public employee's private speech by complaining to their employer. If the answer is yes, then First Amendment protections for scientists, economists, and policy experts become hollow, especially online. Derek Pennington is a conservation scientist and environmental economist with a long record of public-facing commentary and critique. Long before joining the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, the MPCA, he used his personal LinkedIn to critique greenwashing, question the economics of purported sustainable agricultural programs, and invited debate among professionals. His posts addressed core matters of public concern, including environmental impacts, taxpayer subsidies, and regulatory capture. None of this was part of his job duties at the MPCA, and MPCA officials initially praised his curiosity and his expertise. In the posts that are at issue in this case, Derek publicly questioned and criticized Cargill sustainability and regenerative agriculture initiatives, alleging that they were economically unsound, misleading to the public, and amounted to corporate greenwashing that shifted costs to farmers or taxpayers. Cargill, one of the most powerful agribusiness corporations in the world, did not respond publicly to Derek's questions. Instead, it complained directly to MPCA leadership twice. After the second complaint, the MPCA elected not to certify Derek shortly before his probationary period was over, explicitly citing the LinkedIn comment and posts at issue, which Derek had engaged in his personal capacity. The MPCA, importantly, never claimed that Derek's speech was inaccurate. It never showed a disruption to agency operations, and it never identified harm to internal working relationships. The burden, the MPCA later admitted, was simply having to explain Derek's speech to Cargill. The First Amendment is clear. Public employees do not surrender their rights when they accept government employment. When they speak as private citizens on matters of public concern, the government may only take action if the speech actually disrupts agency operations. Here, the agency acted not to preserve efficiency, but to preserve a relationship with a powerful regulated entity. That is not a valid constitutional interest. As the Supreme Court has long recognized, public employees are often the most informed critics, and silencing them impoverishes public debate. Agencies increasingly argue that visibility equals endorsement, that merely listing your employer chills your right to speak at all times. If that logic prevails, the scientists can't question corporate claims, economists can't challenge subsidy schemes, and regulators can't participate honestly in public discourse. This case is asking the courts to reject the idea that LinkedIn turns citizenship into insubordination. I now turn my attention to Derek, who can explain more about his personal experience with this case.
Thank you, Lena. And thank you, Pierre, for the invitation and opportunity to share some of my experiences. I too would like to call out two Minnesotans, fellow Minnesotans, who lost their lives for exercising their First Amendment rights. Renee Good, Alex Preti. Again, my name is Derek Pennington. On November 20th, 2024, I was discharged from my full-time job as economic policy analyst at the state environmental regulator, Minnesota Pollution Control Agency, also known as MPCA. Last fall, I filed a federal lawsuit against MPCA officials led by Commissioner Katrina Kessler, who pushed me out of my job because I spoke publicly about environmental concerns or greenwashing tied to Cargill, the world's largest buyer and trader of agricultural commodities and largest private corporation in the United States. Greenwashing describes the phenomenon of companies using deceptive language or actions to create a false image of environmental responsibility in order to improve their public image. I use my personal LinkedIn account to raise concerns about potentially misleading sustainability claims regarding sustainable aviation biofuels, claims made publicly by Cargill on their own LinkedIn account, because it was an important topic with wide-reaching implications for the public. This topic did not relate to my job duties at the MPCA, nor was it a regulatory or legal matter. Rather than engage with my questions and critiques, Cargill pressured MPCA leadership to muzzle me. The MPCA, which had previously praised my curiosity and willingness to ask the hard questions, terminated me after Cargill complained. Cargill, in an email to the chief of staff to the MPCA commissioner at the time, said they viewed posts on LinkedIn from government employees as distinct from private citizens. The commissioner ignored MPCA's own policies and relented to Cargill's pressure. At the time, I felt devastated, baffled, and angry. I still do, along with now financial stress. I enjoyed my work and was disheartened to no longer be able to engage in it because I believe in public discourse on matters of public concern. What I think is most salient to all public employees is Cargill's view that posts on social media from government employees are distinct from private citizens. Chilling. Because if Cargill can prove you're a government employee, they will interpret your public speech as representing your employer and not yourself, no matter what disclaimers you make. A government employee cannot avoid being publicly outed as being a government employee. It's public information. Cargill's stance is meant to create a chilling effect on government employees, leading to the self-censoring of their free speech for fear of losing their jobs. It denies society the opportunity to hear from its fellow citizens who are scientific and regulatory experts. Public employees should not fear retaliation for being advocates of issues they are knowledgeable and care about. Retaliation by a corporation because I ask critical questions of their public claims by their pressuring my employer to muzzle me has left me chilled and several of my coworkers chilled. I'm angry, I'm sad, sometimes ashamed, depressed, and isolated both professionally and in my personal life. Yet I am emboldened by the desire to protect not only my speech, but those in positions like me. The public disclosure of my experience has resulted in feeling blacklisted by former colleagues and prospective employers because they fear something similar happening to them. And as long as that is the case, all public employees must sacrifice their personal speech to engage in government work they are vital to performing. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lena and Derek, for sharing details of this case with us and the implications it has for all public employees. Now, let's welcome Paula Dinnerstein, Senior Counsel at Peer, to share some closing thoughts. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you. So, hello, everyone. My name is Paula Dinnerstein. I am the Senior Counsel, or one of the Senior Counsel for Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility, or Peer. And I just wanted to give a general look at the legal landscape on the First Amendment stemming from these presentations that you've just heard. So first of all, federal and state employees retain their First Amendment rights. The Supreme Court has recognized that public employees have inside knowledge about their agencies that has special value to the public to hear, and that their speech should be protected. This is in the case of Pickering versus Board of Education from way back in 1968. And that case also held that government agencies may not retaliate against public employees for protected speech by firing, discipline, or other employment actions. However, there are limitations on what is protected. First of all, the speech must be made as a citizen and not as part of the employee's job duties. And this came from a Supreme Court case called Garcetti versus Sabalos in 2006. Second, the speech must be on a matter of public concern. The speech can criticize one's own agency, which we need to distinguish from being as part of one's job duties, as writing a memo, for instance, that's part of your job duties is not protected, but criticizing your agency as a citizen is protected. That criticism will be balanced. The First Amendment rights of the employee will be balanced against the government's interest in avoiding disruption of its operations of the workplace, so that your speech, to be protected, should not be creating tension or conflict, such as by criticizing one's own supervisors or coworkers by name. It should not disrupt the operation of the agency, and it should not interfere with the performance of the employee's job duties. So if you're planning to speak out, consider those limitations and make sure that your speech falls within them. Now, speech away from work and not involving one's own agency should easily meet these requirements. There's no way that it could disrupt the workplace or interfere with the employee's job duties. And that is the situation with Carolyn McConnell and Derek Pennington, who you just heard from. Those cases should be easy. They're obvious that they are protected by the First Amendment. And that's part of the reason their cases are so important, because they're sort of outrageously counter to what the law is on the First Amendment. Also, another consideration is that even if your speech is not protected by the First Amendment, it could still be protected by whistleblower laws. And that, in order to qualify on the federal level at least, your speech would have to call out illegality, gross mismanagement, abuse of authority, or dangers to public health and safety. And sometimes, as in the case of Sarah Sullivan, both of those apply. There's a First Amendment claim and a whistleblower claim. So defending free speech rights of government employees is especially important now in a time of rising authoritarianism. The speech of many voices, many and diverse voices, especially those dissenting from what the government is doing, are essential to democracy at any time, but especially now in the face of increasing authoritarianism that seeks to quash dissent and claims the sole power to define what the truth is. The speech of knowledgeable government employees on issues of public importance and on behalf of advocacy groups whose causes they support is more important than ever, as the administration seeks to trample rights and threaten public health and safety on so many different fronts. Thank you.
Thank you, Paula, for sharing these summary thoughts. And now we have up until about 2 minutes until the top of the hour for open Q&A. And as a reminder, you can submit questions through the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Could all of the speakers turn on their cameras, please? And I'm going to start off with a question that came in from Emma, and this is directed towards Sarah and Joanna. Can you speak to the capacity of the MSPB to actually redress such cases, especially given the loss of quorum for several months and staff losses within the agency? Is there a large backlog given the government-wide attacks on federal employees?
I'll try to give a relatively short answer to this, but it's a very good and important question. There is a large backlog at MSPB, and we are trying to push back against that. One thing to keep in mind with the full quorum and the board, that is the second level of an appeal. At the first level, a case is assigned. Sarah's case and other cases are assigned to administrative judges. And it's our hope that we are trying to, have Sarah's and others' cases heard and adjudicated, dealt with before those judges. I think that, we are extremely concerned about what's happening sort of as far as the Supreme Court and other kind of appellate court decisions that have come out that seem to expand the president's power, potentially expand the president's power to fire heads and members of independent agencies without limit. Humphrey's executor is a longstanding Supreme Court precedent that I was referring to that essentially says you can only fire heads or members of independent agencies like Kathy Harris at MSPB for cause. She was fired for no reason, as was a Democratic member of the NLRB, and there's currently a case before the Supreme Court, Slaughter v. Trump, which involves an FTC member, and essentially where we are is the threats to the hiring and firing of independent agency heads or members by the administration for no reason could potentially happen if the Supreme Court precedent is overturned or limited. And so for us, what does that mean? We are worried about the functioning of MSPB. We are looking at these cases closely, but it's also important to remember that there are multiple levels, and where we're trying to win is at that first level, the administrative judge level, and that's where we are right now. And I'll kind of leave it at that. And Paula, if you want to add anything to my probably answer that was too long.
Thank you. So we have another question for Sarah that came in from Daniel. As a U.S. Interior BLM whistleblower in Nye and Esmeralda counties, Nevada, during Trump 1, I wonder what Nevada tribal issues are at risk due to EPA under Trump 2. Any evidence of mining, lobby, Trump EPA collusion? Thank you for your integrity. And if you have any insight on that, Sarah.
Thanks, Mer, and thank you for the question. I'll say I'm not an expert on that by any means. My recent work with tribes was largely focused on implementing a grant program, but we did have close relationships with tribes in Nevada and hear their perspectives. I know a lot of Nevada tribes have expressed concerns with mining, particularly the boom of lithium mining in the past few years, and its potential short and long-term impacts on human health and the environment. I'll just say, in my personal capacity, I am concerned about the limits on regulation with mining, but I wasn't involved in any discussions internally with EPA with regards to mining, so I can't really speak to that.
Thanks, Sarah. So I have a question that could be answered by any of the panelists. This is from an anonymous attendee. I'm a returning seasonal National Park Service employee in the summers. The job series I am part of is in process of getting rescinded, and I suspect that it's part of an ongoing censorship of interpretive educational materials in the parks. I'm interested in legal action and wonder if anyone is aware of or working on this.
Well, oh, go ahead, Paula, because I don't have
Well, I was
anything
just
very
going to
specific.
say, we are not directly working on this. We're certainly aware of, all the efforts to take down park interpretations that, talk about slavery or anything that the Trump administration considers to put a bad light on American history. And, that definitely is a kind of free speech concern. We personally do not know exactly if there are being cases brought about this or anything. If anybody else does, please speak up.
I don't have anything to add specific, but if you're working in the North Cascades, that's certainly the area that North Cascades Conservation Council is concerned with, and we'd love to hear from you. I will also say that a great resource for federal government employees is the Federal Unionist Network. The reason it's a network of federal workers across agencies, and federal government employees are really siloed in our different agencies and sub-agencies. And so FUN helps to bridge those gaps. And it's a great source of support and information and activism.
And I'll just add quickly, because Carolyn's reminding me of this, Peer always welcomes people coming to us, whether they're current or former public employees, state, federal, local. If you want to anonymously share information or not, but you can anonymously seek legal services. We have an intake form, and you can come to us with specific concerns regarding this or other issues. And obviously that has ultimately led to at least Carolyn and Sarah's case. We are intake driven. So I just want to put out a plug for Peer's legal services there.
Great, thank you. So our next question comes from Laura, and this is directed towards Lena and Derek. Is it legal for corporations to interfere with the government agency's work?
So understandably that there are working relationships between a number of corporations and government agencies. The distinction is a government agency is bound by the First Amendment, where a private corporation doesn't have those same restrictions. And so in Derek's case, the issue is with the fact that all of the actions at issue are coming from a government agency, which has to comply with the First Amendment. And so all agencies have to be mindful of the fact that their employees have First Amendment rights. And so whatever interactions they have between corporations, and that extends to their employees, have to be done with those restrictions in place.
Thanks. All right. This question comes from Tim, and this could be answered by whoever of the panelists feel they would like to chime in. As a journalist, I find most public employees afraid to speak because they've been told all information provided to the press must come via public information offices. Do public employees have First Amendment rights to discuss their work with outsiders?
Start to answer and then be supplemented. As Paul explained, one of the first questions you ask in terms of whether a public employee can speak on an issue is the difference between speaking in their capacity as a government employee, where the government does have the right to control your speech because they are your employer, versus speaking in a private capacity. And so if one of the first things we look at, and I think Frank noted in the chat that we're working on a project related to this, is what are the responsibilities of a particular individual's role. Preferably that's listed on an employment description before someone is hired. Preferably that's also given to the employee so that they actually know what the four corners of their job responsibilities are, including whether they have any responsibilities for engaging with the press externally. If they don't, then it's less likely that whatever speech they engage in happened as part of their official duties. If it's not happening as part of their official duties and it's happening in a private capacity, some other questions I would ask are, is there a particular, some jobs have clearance issues and things that are supposed to be kept confidential and you agree to keep them confidential. That aside, there's nothing generally that prohibits an employee from speaking in their private capacity outside of their job responsibilities on things that they have expertise on. And that's one of the concerns in Derek's case is if the position is that that can't happen, then there's a lot of expertise that you're silencing from the people who are most knowledgeable on a variety of topics that we should be able to hear from.
And I'll just add, obviously in Sarah's case and the folks from EPA that were fired, to add to Lena's point, speaking in one's private capacity on a matter of public concern, like EPA abandoning its public health mission, is just so critical. And Sarah and others that were fired are extremely experienced, extremely decorated, exemplary employees. And so if we're silencing these people who are saying, hey, the administration is gutting and ruining this agency and everyone pays the price, our public health pays the price, it's so important to make sure that we preserve the ability for public employees like Sarah in their personal capacity to speak about this kind of public issue of public import.
So I just wanted to add to that most agencies do have policies about getting clearance before speaking to the press or publishing, and we generally advise people to comply with those. But those policies can't take away your First Amendment rights. And if they're implemented in a way that impinges on your First Amendment rights, that can be challenged.
Right. Anyone else like to add something? All right. We're going to move on. So we had an anonymous question for Sarah. Do you regret signing the letter of dissent?
Helps if I turn on my microphone, huh? No, I don't regret it. I was shocked by the retaliation, very upset, and definitely still recovering from that. But it was really important to me to sign the letter and important to let the public know our concerns. And I'm also so grateful for the support I've received from former colleagues in their personal capacities, as well as friends and family and others that validate my decision to sign.
Thanks, Sarah. Appreciate you describing that experience and for being brave enough to sign a letter that you felt so strongly about. Okay, moving on, we have a question. This could be for Derek, Carolyn, and Sarah, if you all have some input on this one. This was also an anonymous question. What advice would you give to other federal or state employees with regards to free speech, given your experience?
Kick that one off. Unless Derek, you came off mute if you want to go. I just spoke, so go ahead.
I guess, to be conscious and aware of, times when you're self-censoring. And I think there's a lot of self-censoring going on because of the fear of retaliation. And I think being aware of when you might be doing that consciously or subconsciously, because that fear is pretty strong. But I do think, given the advice that Paula gave earlier on where you can speak out and exercise your personal free speech, I would implore everyone to do so. There are great risks from that I think the three of us have shown on this panel and many others. But it's critical to exercise that right, especially as public employees. So I would strongly encourage it.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I'd say know your rights. I think we've talked a little bit about, Paula mentioned a little bit about the scope of that and knowing what your rights are as a federal, state, or nonprofit employee, and speak out when it's the right moment for you. Everyone has different experiences, different thresholds for risk, and the right moment for me was not necessarily the right moment for someone else, and that's okay. And knowing that there are people out here who will support you for speaking out, and it's important that we're not intimidated by this administration.
I agree with everything that Derek and Sarah have said. I think it is really important to join with others to make yourself safer and to get support, whether that's your union, and your union is your union, whether your employer decides to recognize it as your union is, is your fellow workers standing together. That is what a union is. So join with your union if you have one, organize a union if you don't, and find support however you can amongst your coworkers and others, because that makes you safer.
Thanks
So
all.
I just wanted to add there that I gave an overview of the law and when you're protected by the First Amendment and when you're protected by whistleblower laws, but there are a lot of nuances. And if it's at all possible, if you're planning to do something like this, it's a good idea to consult with an attorney. And it could be peer, it could be anybody else, but you can get advice on, whether what you're planning to do will be protected and the best ways to do it to protect yourself.
Thanks, Paula. We have another question here. This was from an anonymous attendee, and this is for Colleen. Could you tell us more about the conflict of interest statute involved in Carolyn's case?
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, it's 18 USC 205, and specifically the subsection of Section 205 prohibits federal employees from acting as an agent or attorney for anyone before any department, agency, court, etc., in connection with any covered matter in which the United States is a party or has a direct and substantial interest. So here we really have to look at what a covered matter means. So looking at the definition of a covered matter, it's any judicial or other proceeding, application, request for a ruling or other determination, contract, claim, controversy, investigation, charge, accusation, arrest, or other particular matter. So as you can see, there's a long laundry list of things that are explicitly included as a covered matter, but then finally, there's the other particular matter at the very end. And in Carolyn's case, that is what is being litigated over. What does other particular matter mean? There isn't much case law on this. It's a pretty obscure statute that isn't really litigated very often, but there is a precedent in the DC Circuit Court with Van E versus EPA. And essentially, they look at what particular matter means. And in that case, they determined that advocacy for broad policy measures don't really fit the criteria. And mostly that's because particular matters should confer a benefit on a particular party that's a discrete, identifiable person or persons. So broad policy matters that impact a large swath of the community, the country, isn't really included as a particular matter. Particular matters are more akin to licenses, so that would be conferring a particular benefit onto a specific person or parties. And in our case, we believe that Carolyn's speech is much more akin to advocating for a broad policy issue versus conferring a specific benefit on a small discrete party. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the judge in this case seems to agree with our interpretation of what a particular matter means.
Thanks, Colleen. We had a question earlier from Faith, and I think this could be for Paula. Is there a term for when a government agency alleges fraud against an organization as a form of retaliation?
So what we have been dealing with is the rights of employees and not to be retaliated against in their employment, being fired or demoted or whatever in the course of their jobs as retaliation for First Amendment activity or for whistleblowing activity. It sounds like the question is more about kind of defamation of a private group. If I don't have that right, let me know, but that seems to be a different area of law as to whether that organization might have some rights to challenge the statements about them.
Great. And Paula, just one follow-up question that's similar from Elizabeth. Do First Amendment rights protections extend to nonprofit employers?
So as I believe Lena explained also, what we're talking about here, what the First Amendment protects against is state action. So it's the federal government or through the 14th Amendment, the Bill of Rights, including the First Amendment, is also applicable to state agencies. It's not applicable to private parties. And I think Derek mentioned that also, that Cargill is a private party. They could fire their own employees for speaking out, and it wouldn't violate the First Amendment. It has to be some sort of state action.
Thanks. All right, so I think we have time for one more question. We're coming up on top of the hour. These questions were kind of related from Elizabeth and Leondra. So are Derek, Carolyn, and Sarah able to receive unemployment benefits? Are you able to consult for environmental nonprofits in need of your expertise? And this is from Leondra, how can we support people who have been singled out for their free speech?
I can speak on that a bit. So I did apply for unemployment benefits through the state of Minnesota, and I had to explain why I was discharged, which the state of Minnesota said I violated or MPCA said I violated their social media policy. That resulted in my not being awarded initially unemployment benefits because I was discharged because of quote unquote disciplinary action. And Lena, if I'm going, you can help explain here. But I appealed that decision and presented my case, what I've shared with you here, to a unemployment judge who ruled in my favor and reversed the decision. He said that MPCA letting me go because of breaking the social media policy didn't rise to the level of being a disciplinary action. And so then I was awarded my full unemployment benefits paid for by the state.
Yeah, similarly, I was able to get unemployment through the state of California. Um, had to go through a bit of a longer interview process to share what had happened to me and the specifics around it, beyond just the initial form.
I'm lucky to still have my job, but I did claim unemployment benefits during the recent federal government shutdown, and I will do so again if the government shuts down, as it may do this coming week. And I think federal employees tend to underclaim for unemployment. So for all the federal employees here, you are entitled to it during a federal government shutdown.
All right, thanks everyone so much. Looks like we're at time here, so could we bring up the closing slides, please? And while we do that, Tim, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah, since we're at 3 o'clock, I'll make this really quick. I know people have to get off. I pulled some things out that some of the speakers said, and I'll just mention a couple of them. One is the toll on the people that speak out is enormous, and we can't forget the human toll of what's happening here as we talk about retaliation against government employees. These are real people, and we deserve to treat people in our communities, people that work for the government, much better. Carolyn said something that I'll just emphasize, and that is really the dizzying speed of change these days make it difficult to calculate the risk. And she also said fear is contagious, but so is courage. And so I just want to leave people with that before we go to the resource page and let those of you that are still on the call know that there are resources out there for you. Peer is one, legal clinics are others, are other resources, and there are other nonprofits working on these issues. So again, thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Carolyn, and thank you, Derek, for your bravery in standing up for what's right.
Thanks, Tim, and thanks to the audience for joining us today for this important discussion. We have compiled this list of background information and resources you can access through these links, and we'll be sending a follow-up email to attendees with a copy of these slides as well as a recording of the webinar. Next slide. And thanks so much for our guest speakers today for partnering with us on this webinar. If you want to learn more about our work and get involved, please visit our website. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.